better than a lot of different state solutions. That the idea of each state coming up with their own approach to this in any shape, manner, or form is very worrisome to us, obviously. We have some significant concerns about the Marketplace Fairness Act. We see the hybrid origin sourcing is just basically doing what we're doing today. I happen to live in Rhode Island. I drive all through New England. I love New Hampshire, but I also go to Vermont. I don't make a decision to ski in New Hampshire as opposed to skiing in Vermont because of sales tax. And I certainly am in Massachusetts. It's literally a couple of miles from me. And I know when I go to Massachusetts, I pay a different sales tax than I pay in Rhode Island. But I'm used to dealing with that because it's the states that I'm already in. It's the states that I have a business in or have a physical presence in. The real advantages of that, I think, are fairly obvious. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you, and appreciate your trying to figure this out in a sensible and reasonable way. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whitney from PayPal, and can I remind you, please, 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, members of the committee, Devin Whitney with the PayPal Government Relations team. I actually wasn't given any advance notice that I would be called to the witness table today, so I don't have a prepared presentation to give you guys. So I suppose it would be best to use my time up here to perhaps let you ask questions of me, if that would be all right with you.
Great, and I was worried about another over presentation. So thank you very much for that. Do any of the task force members have any questions for either of these two gentlemen? Yes, ma'am. Representative Almay from New Hampshire.
I'm not sure whether it's to one of you or to Mr. Davison, but did the bill as it passed the Senate include mail-in catalogs? Because I was under the impression they were being exempted, even though that does create problems. I mean, like I look at my mail catalogs and then I go online, or I go online and then I go to the mail-in catalog. I get a choice.
I do believe most consumers are savvy enough to do the same. Mr. Davison?
Yes, if you're comfortable with using a computer, as we both are, then frequently one is essentially equal to the other. We make no differentiation as a consumer. To your first question, my understanding is there is no exemption from the Marketplace Fairness Act as passed in the Senate last year for catalog companies.
Assemblyman Ortiz from New York.
Yeah, I'm very curious because you put New York on taxes and you left Louisiana behind. So I want to make sure that we are fair with taxes in New York. I just kidding.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little hard time hearing you.
It's about the taxes. You put New York as a taxes. That's a great example of how expensive we are in New York. But my question is regarding the catalogs. Do every catalog has a website? Do every one of them have a website? And
Yes, there's no significant size catalog company over a couple of $1 million of sales that wouldn't have a fairly sophisticated e-commerce deployment.
And they also have a storefronts, right? I assume.
Some do, some do not. It really depends on the history of the company, the product, the temperament of the owner, a lot of different variation there. Certainly, some of our members have as many as 700, 800 stores. So they're already in, say, 20, 25 states and would welcome the simplification that might occur here. Others just have a single store, if they have a store at all, in the state that they do business in, or they may have stores in a variety of nearby states.
Any of the other members? My question would be, we're in the age of customer service, and obviously most of our large entities are bending over backwards to try and retain their customers and provide that service. With regard to how difficult it would be for someone to determine what tax to pay, could we not do something again on a website where that information would be provided at a click of a button, or a toll-free number, which everyone is familiar with utilizing? I mean, wouldn't that be an easy answer to trying to figure out, as opposed to that 6-point type and 56 pages of information?
Yes, certainly for those people that are, from the consumer perspective, that are using the website or calling into a call center, provided that the catalog marketer could figure it out and execute, there would not be inconvenienced. From the consumer perspective, the real problem comes in with the 10% of orders that are received through the mail. And again, that's in some cases 30 or 40% for some companies and nearly zero for others, most disproportionately on rural and older Americans. Those are the people that would be particularly affected by this.
Okay, thank you. And anyone else? Yes, Representative Link.
I tend not to use this because it usually gets me in trouble, but I just can't stop right now. It may be the same group that's affected by voter ID in those states that have passed those laws.
Representative Almay.
Yes, thank you. Just following up on that, on how many of your catalog only on buyers do you think on, or rather sellers, do you think would have a 24-hour, be able to afford a 24-hour customer service line to tell people what the sales tax was going to be? Because
Well, I haven't done any
Use them
research
in the
on
middle
that,
of the
so I'll
night.
give you my opinion. Mostly today, they do not staff a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week call center. They tend to cluster it when people are calling, and it's not business hours, but extended business hours. Certainly the website would be available 24/7, 365, but I don't think any other way of contacting would be. And a lot of people don't necessarily pick up the phone. About, as I say, 10% just fill out an order form and mail it.
Thank you. Any other questions for this panel? Representative Perone.
Thank you very much. I just had a quick question, something that's been sort of gnawing at me. Before I was a legislator, I was in direct marketing, and if you had a 1.5% response, that was a pretty good week. If you had 2%, that's you can go home early that week. It was good news. The question though is that we spent an inordinate amount of time on understanding and simplifying our order forms, our order process to really take as much onus off the buyer as possible. And going forward, just the way the trends are, and wouldn't it be more than likely that as needed, that the calculations, everything required to compute the tax would be, assuming that people would just be more or less, if this is any indication, people would go to the website as soon as they get the catalog or want to make an order, that everything would be computed there, that it would be written into the software of the website, so they wouldn't have to do the calculations themselves. I guess what I'm saying is, just the general trend of technology is, I think, it's less likely that the customer is going to have to make these calculations themselves. And do you see that trend, or is that because that seems to be more and more the case?
Well, certainly the internet has changed everything, and the internet certainly has changed catalog marketing, and a significant number, half or so, a little more than half even, orders come in via the internet. So from that perspective, the only real concern with MFA is the compliance cost. And the consumer confusion about why a product was taxed at one rate this time and at a different rate during a sales tax holiday, and or has changed definitions. Some of that could be a consumer burden, but we still have about 10% of the orders that are coming in via the mail, and that's been fairly stable, even through the growth of the internet in the last 5 years. So we don't really have a solution for that piece of it, and that represents a lot of Americans and obviously a lot of commerce as well.
Sorry, one more question, because the concept of demographics came up earlier. Certainly a lot of senior citizens tend to take advantage more of direct marketing approaches, catalog approaches, and do you see situations? Is it more likely that it would depress response to have a scheme where the end user would have to do more of the computations on their end?
Well, that's an absolute concern, and you're right on with your, obviously you have a background in the direct marketing business. Anything that creates confusion or complexity is going to depress response rate, and it will be difficult for this whole industry sector to respond to.
Yes, Representative Almay.
Thank you. I think I've said this in past meetings, but people also have to remember that a lot of you live in cities. I'm at the center of a micropolis, which is high-tech. I live 3 miles away from the DSL, so the only option that I have for anything other than dial-up is an extremely expensive Comcast bill. And there are a lot of little places all over America like that, and Comcast is monopoly, and they keep on raising the rates, and a lot of my constituents keep on dropping out. Thank you.
Assemblyman Ortiz from New York.
I would not talk about Comcast, but that's another New York issue. So let me. Yes, I want to. Probably the question is not probably appropriate for this forum, but I have a quick question follow up on direct marketing. The Hispanic community, they get a lot of direct marketing and catalogs, and it's a lot of fraud.
You say fraud?
Fraud that is behind all this, especially that you have some of these catalogs that are coming from, like, for example, South and Central America, Peru, Ecuador, Mexico. And people have a tendency within my community to go into and listen to Univision, Telemundo, and go and buy products or believing that they are buying some product. Do you guys have any guideline and control over this magnitude of catalogs outside United States as well?
No, we do not.
Okay, but their market also could be in Texas.
Yes, it could be, or Florida, or California, or anywhere else Hispanics have
That's
to be.
correct.
Yeah, but we are not. We have no overseas members, and we have no influence of that population. We certainly do have members that market to Hispanics as U.S. businesses, but nothing offshore.
I would like to follow up with you after the
I'll give you my card.
presentation. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time for this panel? Gentlemen, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to call up the next panel, which is Mike Massey of Massey's Professional Outfitters.
Good morning.
Thank you.
My name is Mike Massey. I'm the owner of a small specialty store here in Louisiana that has 5 locations. And we sell both the local people and we also sell online. So I wanted to come today and speak to you guys about what it means to actually be a retailer in this position. I'm going to read a short statement and I would love to answer any questions about being a retailer. I'm the 3rd generation owner of Massey's Outfitters. The original shop opened in 1972. It's grown to almost 50 employees. We were one of the first businesses to come back to New Orleans after Katrina. Since then, our neighborhood has experienced substantial growth. Over 40 years, we've employed thousands of locals, entry-level positions. A lot of those have gone on to become doctors and lawyers, and some of them are even politicians today. Customers come to my store because they want our expertise. They want to see our assortment of merchandise, and that type of merchandise is not commonly found below sea level. Many of the unique products that I sell are costly, and the average shopper spends around $200 per visit. In New Orleans Parish, the sales tax is 9%. A 9% savings on a $300 jacket is almost $30. Because of the potential savings, it's not uncommon for a customer to tell us thanks for letting them try on the pack, the boots, the jacket, and then walking out the door and saving the $30 or $50. Retailers like me are required by law to collect sales tax on purchases within our stores. I do business in one of the highest sales tax areas in the country. In fact, I'm the 3rd highest sales tax district in the country. The size of our local tax would not really be that big of a concern if I was only competing against locals. It would really not be any concern to me at all. But for me to compete against people that are selling to my local customers from the internet and collecting no sales tax at all puts me at a serious economic disadvantage. I'm excited today to hear that there's movement on the issue on whether or not a remote seller would be required to pay sales tax to their home state or home tax district. And I'm glad to hear that it's moved beyond just like whether they do it, but into the position of now how do they do it. I think there's only one answer. The state and the local government imposed levy on purchases in a given district should be applied similarly to all similar purchases made within that jurisdiction. I understand the collection proposals under consideration at this hearing are known as hybrid origin sourcing. As I understand it, this proposal would require that remote sellers collect tax on sales outside of their states at the same rate they apply in-state. And there would be some mechanism for sending tax collected to the state treasury for the state where the purchaser is. This proposal makes no business sense to me. You would be asking me to charge 9% sales tax to 49 states that potentially charge, or 47 states that potentially charge a lower sales tax than I do. That puts me at a tremendous disadvantage when I'm trying to compete against other merchants. So if I'm selling to somebody in New Hampshire who collects no sales tax at all, I'm immediately starting out almost 10% more expensive than they are. Right now, I sell to 49 states and don't collect any sales tax. That would essentially put me out of business for selling products outside of Louisiana. My local customers will continue to not submit local sales tax, will continue to not submit their legally required local sales tax, and I will no longer be able to compete as an online merchant unless I move my shipping facilities to a distribution center in a state that does not require me to meet that burden. And that's exactly what will happen. I will move my income tax, my warehouse, my inventory tax, my sales tax. I'll move all of that to a distribution center that doesn't require me to collect that sales tax. It's just too much of a burden. I will either have to shut down or I will have to move that business. I'd like to offer some practical, I'd like to offer some advice with this, to do with this proposal. In Louisiana, our current governor has proposed replacing all other taxes with a larger sales tax because he thinks it's better for economic growth. There's other states that prefer to do the opposite. In our federal system, it seems to me that the choice of form of taxes should be left to the state and local governments. I think you guys have covered that pretty substantially today. In this hybrid origin proposal, it would say that New Orleans' high local sales tax should be applied to people in New Hampshire, where their local government does not like sales tax. This just doesn't make sense to me. I understand the reason behind the hybrid tax is simplicity, but in the age of technology where we already collect up to 600 pieces of data when we deal with a shopper online, it just doesn't seem difficult for me to determine what an individual seller should be paying in sales tax when I'm doing an online transaction. I can determine today, right now, as orders come in, as we speak, what the exact shipping rate should be for one house versus another. I can tell you that on a street, I would charge maybe $7.95 for one house and $8.43 for another house for that delivery. That's calculated not in 6,000 or 9,600 or 10,000 different tax districts, but it's calculated for 250 million individuals in this country. And it happens within 1 second on my site. Also, as it relates to the tax collected on my site, I already have all of the software available on my platform to collect sales tax in every single zip code in the country. I pay $49 a month to my e-commerce provider to calculate those taxes. Escrowing them would be one of the least complicated parts of selling online. In conclusion, it's retailers like me who are the foundation of Main Street in every part of every community. And I'd welcome any efforts that this group can make to eliminate unfair tax advantages that internet sellers currently enjoy. I sell on the internet because I have to. And a lot of other small retailers do too. But whatever advantage I may enjoy for not collecting sales tax on internet sales is far more than offset by the harm that these rules cause to my local market. Too many local retailers are shutting down. Malls are closing their doors, and you read about it every single day, and part of it is the 10%, 5%, 6% tax advantage that is happening, and it's only increasing. We see it every day. We see people in our stores, and they are using their phones to make determinations on whether or not they can buy that product for a cheaper price right there in my store after they've been helped. And I strongly encourage you to address this. And the last thing I'd want to say is that I understand the comments that have been made about the federal government versus the state government. If each state doesn't want to have a sales tax or doesn't want to enforce the sales tax on individual shoppers, I would encourage those states to pass a law and take it out to the retailers in their community and say, we're no longer going to legally require your citizens. But this loophole that's created that the politicians and the revenue boards are playing peekaboo with shoppers in local stores is damaging local stores. Something really needs to change, and I'm really happy that you guys are here trying to resolve what that is.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Your frustration is evident. Thank you very much, truly.
Thank you.
Any questions from the task force members? And welcome, Assemblyman Conway from New Jersey, correct, sir? Not a member of our task force, but we welcome you, and certainly we encourage you to ask questions.
I did, I'm glad to hear the small business perspective on this this morning, and maybe I missed it, but, a good friend of mine, college, family business, selling carpet wares outlets in New York and in North Jersey, and get together for Christmas or whatever else, and the complaint always, I'm competing against people who do not have to pay the taxes that I have to pay. I guess what is this? The people that come in and lay carpet, come into your house. I don't want to name them, but anyway, that kind of an operation, low cost, is seriously damaged their family business that they've had for several generations, and it is. And I worry about that sort of Main Street person whose business now goes away. They're probably hiring people in New Jersey who are spending their income in New Jersey and helping support other small businesses in New Jersey. That now is being being run out of business by people who can compete against them on a much different playing field. And I thought that was the frustration that you had expressed.
It's absolutely one.
And how do you think that problem ought to be addressed? Because I heard a couple of things which, pardon me, sounded a little contradictory. You could figure out the shipping costs and for a number of jurisdictions, but the sales tax issue seems one that can't be, that you don't have a solution for. I thought I heard, and if I
No, sir.
heard you, then I apologize. I also wondered what percentage of your business is now online as opposed to local, and what solution you have to protect. And I think that person ought to be protected. That business goes out. The business next door to them might go out. Those employees who work there now are not contributing to the economy, and we have schools that go down, services that go down, and you have property values come down. I see this all the time, and you were right. Something needs to be done. I'm wondering what suggestions you have.
So first, I want to make 2 points to your comments. The first is that I was, I guess, poorly making the point that it's relatively simple to determine what the actual charges for shipping is to an individual address. I can't imagine that it would be difficult to determine what the tax is to a particular address.
Oh, okay.
We already do that to a number of addresses within Louisiana, and in no way does it create a complicated scenario for
I see.
us.
Mhm.
The second part of the answer to your question is that if you have people from New York going into New Jersey or vice versa and delivering products to a local individual within that particular market, the tax is very clear. The tax is not on the seller. The tax is on the buyer. In this particular circumstance, we reversed course and said that somehow the onus of collecting this tax has to fall on the seller. But the reality is that if somebody's in New Jersey and they're buying carpet from somebody in New York, that person in New Jersey, just like the way that they would buy a car, is still obligated to pay the tax for New Jersey for their own purchase and their own consumption. In Louisiana, on your income statement, on your income tax statement, it actually asks, what did you buy online per year? We just aren't enforcing that. It's not a question of a new tax, old tax, state tax, any of that kind of stuff. Everything exists. It's just that we're kind of giving consumers a wink while simultaneously hurting local retailers and asking them to kind of ignore that. And the last answer is that at some point in the past, my internet sales to my local sales was about 50-50, and today it's about 90-10 with local sales, because I see that serving local customers is actually something that we can have more success in over the next few decades.
90 local, 10% out? Is that
Yes, yes, sir.
Wow. And a nice distinction made. Thank you very much. Other questions? Wow. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I would ask, though, too, and I don't want to put you on the spot, so maybe the answer can be given at a later date. There are basically kind of the two proposals that are out there. You as a retailer, do you have a strong affinity to one of them, or are you just saying the playing field should be leveled? And if you don't have an opinion at this particular point, is there an opportunity for you to become more familiar with both of the proposals and give an opinion at a later date?
Right. The two proposals, the one being where that I'm only become more familiar with this morning on the hybrid tax solution. That essentially puts me in a position between a rock and a hard place. I've got to collect my normal tax, 9%, on my local customers, while virtually nobody else has to collect as high of a tax. So I'm encouraging them to continue to shop from 49 other states, while simultaneously, if I try to ship to those other states, I'm at a 9 or 10% tax disadvantage. So unless the plan was for me to move my shipping facilities to a distribution center that exists in another state, which I would imagine virtually every online seller of any size, 7, 8, 9-figure business, is going to move their shipping facilities and at least that portion of their business to the states that don't have to collect sales tax. That's absolutely going to happen almost immediately. We're creating that proposal creates the onus for each company to make a decision of where would they locate their business, and a 10% disadvantage would not be where somebody would locate their business.
Thank you very much. I
you.
appreciate the answer. One last question? Yes, Representative Almay from New Hampshire.
Just following up on that one, as I understand this hybrid proposal, you'd have to have more employees in the shipping center than you did in all of your other business in order to...
Yes, ma'am. But that assumes that we would not just make that a separate business, which we would do.
Another question? Representative Link, did you have a question? No? Thank you, Mr. Massey. We appreciate
Thank
the
you.
comments. And now I'd like to invite up panel 4, which consists of Craig Johnson from the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board, as well as Fred Nicely, who represents the Council on State Taxation.
I believe I'm going to go first.
Okay, let me remind you, 10 minutes, and then again, identify yourself and your affiliation.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Altuff, Delegate Hickson, Representative Perone, and members of the NCSL Task Force on State and Local Taxation for the invitation to talk with you today. My name is Craig Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about this hybrid origin sourcing and some of the concerns and questions I and others from the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board have with respect to this proposal. I also hope to be able to provide you some information about what the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board member states have already done to simplify collection, reporting, and remittance of sales tax using a destination-based sourcing on remote sales. I want to stress that the goal of the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board is to find a federal solution that is fair to all of the players involved, remote sellers, purchasers, and the states. And it's not subject to easy manipulation by sellers or purchasers. We firmly believe that what we've done through the Streamlined Sales and Use Tax Agreement has proven that destination-based sourcing works because of the simplifications and uniformity requirements contained in the agreement and the services offered by our certified service providers. I want to point out that although I and others from the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board have met numerous times with one or more members of the Judiciary Committee staff, and we've asked for copies of legislative language, even draft language, we have not been provided anything more than this diagram at this point in time. So I want to make sure that that is clear. I also want to make it clear that because no legislative language has been provided with respect to hybrid origin sourcing, the comments that I'm going to be providing on behalf of the Governing Board are based strictly on the comments and the discussions we've had with Judiciary Committee staff, and also the general concept as it was described in Christopher Cox's testimony before the House Judiciary Committee in March of 2014. I'm not going to talk about my understanding of what hybrid origin. I think that what Mr. Del Bianco did and the preface that you all provided was fantastic, so people should understand what the general premise is. I do want to talk about our concerns with the hybrid origin sourcing compact. And that's the first issue, the compact itself. Why would a state even join the compact? Sure, states have to join the compact to get the collection authority, that have the option of joining or not joining, and yes, they might obtain some additional revenues that goes uncollected today, but only from remote sellers in other states that have also chosen to join that compact. However, by joining the compact, states are also subjecting their own in-state sellers to requirements that they collect tax on transactions today that they're not required to collect on, which will put them at a competitive disadvantage with those sellers that are located in a compact state and don't have to collect tax on those same transactions. Also, they'll have to gather and maintain necessary information to identify which zip code and which state's entitled to the tax, along with the amount of tax, and then complete a more complex return to report this to their home state. The home state then is going to have to make sure that that money goes off to the clearinghouse and that the information is there that will allow the clearinghouse to get the money off to the proper state. It's very unlikely that the 5 non-sales tax states would ever join the compact, because by joining, they'd be supporting a true tax increase on their own residents by requiring them to pay sales tax on any purchases they make from remote sellers located in other compact states, when today, those same purchasers do not legally owe any sales or use tax on those purchases. If they join the compact, they'd also be requiring their own in-state sellers to either start collecting, accounting for, reporting, and paying sales taxes on any remote sales made to purchasers located in other compact states, or report the necessary information so that the purchaser state can pursue the applicable use tax that would be due. Based on this, does anyone really think any one of those 5 non-sales tax states would voluntarily choose to join this compact? And it's not just the non-sales tax states would be raising taxes on their own residents under this concept. States with a low sales tax rate would also be subjecting their residents to a tax increase on any purchases they make from a remote seller located in any other compact state that has a higher sales tax rate than their own. The fact is that the only state's residents that can be guaranteed to not end up with a tax increase on their remote purchases are those residents located in the highest rate state. Otherwise, any purchaser from any state that purchased a taxable product from a remote seller located in any other state with a higher rate would see a true tax increase. And let me explain this just a little bit further. For example, if we take just state sales tax into account, California had the highest state sales tax rate as of January 1, 2014 at 7.5%. If all the states join the compact, purchasers in every state that make a purchase from a remote seller located in California would see a tax increase under the hybrid origin sourcing. At the same time, every California purchaser that made a purchaser from a remote seller in any other state would see a tax decrease. Although this might sound good to the residents of California, this ultimately could result in California's sales tax revenues declining as more and more purchasers figure out they can save sales taxes by making purchasers in states with no sales tax or a state with a lower rate. And at the same time, California would be prohibited from requiring those purchasers to pay the additional use tax for that rate differential. Is it right that the state of California's sales and use tax revenues could be severely affected by the actions of legislators in another state? Would California really want to join the compact and risk seeing their sales tax revenues go down? Would California want to put their sellers at this competitive disadvantage? Do you really think the other states would join the compact knowing they are likely approving a true tax increase on their residents? Under the Marketplace Fairness Act or similar legislation that utilizes a proven destination-based sourcing regime, purchasers in the same state would be required to pay the same amount of tax on purchases from remote sellers, regardless of where that seller is located. This would eliminate any true tax increase and allow each state to control its own sales and use tax revenues. Second concern that we have is that we think that sellers are going to move to low or non-sales tax states or states that have not joined the compact. Sellers know and understand the advantage they gain when they do not have to collect sales tax on a transaction, but a competitor does. Likewise, many purchasers are willing to make their purchases while only looking for the lowest overall price, even if the only difference is the sales tax. After all, unless I'm buying something that I think I'm going to need serviced after I purchase it, do I really care which seller I purchase it from? If 10 vendors are selling the exact same product, same price, one has to collect tax and one doesn't, which one do you think I'm going to make that purchase from? Under the hybrid origin sourcing concept, any state that does not join the compact will potentially become a tax haven for remote sellers, and purchasers will figure out who to buy from to legally avoid paying the tax. The end result of this over time will be that states that have joined the compact or have a sales tax will likely see sellers making remote sales move to the states that either have not joined the compact or have very low or no sales taxes. Do we really want a system where sellers or remote sellers may choose which state to locate their business in based on whether or not they'll have to collect sales tax on their remote sales? Next concern that we have is that purchasers are going to buy products from remote sellers located in other compact states that do not impose sales tax on the particular product they're looking for. Again, compact states eventually will see their revenues decline. Under the hybrid origins concept, remote sellers will apply the sales and use tax laws, rules, and regulations that are in effect for their own home state, regardless of what the laws are in the purchaser's state. At the same time, states will be prohibited from imposing use tax on the purchase of the product by the purchaser. This type of system is very vulnerable to manipulation by the purchasers. Again, let me give you a simple example. Let's assume every state joins a compact. State A currently does not impose sales tax on clothing, but State B does. Purchasers will figure out that if they buy clothing from a remote seller located in State A, they can avoid paying any sales tax on the transaction. But if they buy the same clothing from a remote seller located in State B, they're going to be required to pay the tax. Eventually, everyone will know that if they purchase clothing from a remote seller in State B as opposed to State A, they will not have to pay any sales or use tax. Although State A's remote sellers' businesses will likely flourish, State B's remote sellers' business will likely suffer. Again, because the government is going to be picking winners and losers. In addition, the states in which the purchasers are located will eventually see their sales tax revenues decline because the purchasers have figured out a way to avoid paying sales tax on clothing. And this can happen not only with clothing, but any other product that any other state has chosen to exempt. Fourth concern that we have is that purchasers are going to be required to pay tax based on the seller's home state, even if the purchaser is located in a state that does not impose sales tax. Again, under hybrid origin sourcing, purchasers are required to pay the tax that's imposed based on the seller's home state's laws, rules, and regulations. This will result in purchasers located in states that exempt certain products being required to pay sales tax on their purchases from remote sellers of these products because the seller's home state imposes tax on these products. This is another true tax increase that states that join the compact will be approving. Last point that we want to make as far as concerns, because of the interest of time, is the fact that multi-state sellers are going to have multiple sales tax collection systems in place. Under the hybrid origin sourcing concept, a seller that makes remote sales into a compact member state would be required to apply its home state's rules to those transactions, even though this may or may not even be the location from which the product is shipped. That same seller might also make sales to purchasers that are located in another compact state in which the seller has nexus, but again, which is not its home state. For those transactions, the seller has to have a system that will apply the laws, rules, and regulations of the state into which the product is shipped, the destination-based sourcing rules that we enjoy today. Finally, the same seller can also make remote sales to a purchaser located in a non-compact state in which the seller does not have any nexus or any physical presence, and therefore today doesn't collect any sales tax at all. It's three different systems that a seller's system is going to have to account for, three different types of transactions under the hybrid origin sourcing proposal. Do you want to mention, and Delegate Hickson mentioned this in her opening statements, Streamline did consider origin sourcing at the time Streamline began. This predates me. However, there is an issue paper that I would point you to that is on our website that deals with sourcing, that addresses those issues. We have got some of the same exact arguments that support origin sourcing that we're hearing today, the simplicity from the seller's standpoint. But it also creates a very, very unlevel playing field overall when you look at it from the purchaser's standpoint and from the state standpoint as well. Would like to point out that Streamline currently has over half the states with a sales tax as members of our governing board. We have over 2,300 retailers that are voluntarily, and I stress voluntarily, collecting sales tax in all 24 of our member states, regardless of any physical presence, regardless of any nexus in those states. The reason they've done this, because we've made things simpler and more uniform. And we also offer the services of our certified service providers at no charge to these remote sellers or the sellers in states where they're volunteers. So it makes the accounting for this, the collection, the reporting, and the calculation very easy. To date, based on amounts reported to me by the member states, these sellers have collected and remitted over $1.7 billion of sales tax since October of 2005 that otherwise may have been uncollected. Again, because of the simplification, uniformity provisions, rate and jurisdiction databases, et cetera. Conclusion, I just want to say the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board continues through the cooperative effort of state legislators, state tax administrators, accountants, attorneys, and the business community to look for ways to make sales and use tax simpler and easier to administer from both the state's and the business's perspective, while at the same time protecting state sovereignty and making it fair to all of the parties involved, sellers, purchasers, and the states. Unfortunately, the hybrid origin sourcing concept is an attempt to turn the tried and true destination-based sourcing hierarchy upside down and will result in a tax increase on millions of Americans. This alone will prevent most, if not all, of the states from joining the compact that would be required to obtain collection authority, and would result in congressional authority that few, if any, states would adopt, leaving states no choice but to continue to find other ways to be able to compel sellers to collect their tax. States don't want to do this, and I don't believe any business wants this either. I thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you today. Be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. We'll hold off on those questions until Mr. Nicely makes his presentation as well.
Thank you, co-chairs and member of the task force. I do really appreciate being able to talk to you today, and hopefully you have my written testimony and also a cost policy statement that was adopted by the cost board. My name is Fred Nicely. I'm Senior Tax Counsel with the Council on State Taxation, and we have over 600 corporate members that are engaged in interstate and international affairs, and so they have tax responsibilities, and many of our members in all 50 of the states. And our objective is to promote fair and equitable and non-discriminatory state taxation. And we've been working with the Streamlined Sales Tax Project for all 15 years that it's been in existence. And we do think that it's a very important project. Our membership, it's a very diverse base of businesses that we have out there. We have a lot of retailers, and those retailers, some of them are principally remote sellers. Others are principally brick and mortar stores, and then we have those that do both. And then also very importantly, this proposal also impacts other members of our industry, such as manufacturers, who are very concerned with how the state's exemptions to their sales and use tax is going to work under a hybrid origin structure. Not having any specific details of how this legislation would work, and really the devil is in the details. If all you know as legislators, it's important to be able to look through that. We don't feel comfortable at the present time as being able to say we are for or we are against hybrid origin sourcing. However, we do have a lot of concerns. It is something that is a radical divestiture from what the states have done in the past. You look at our modern day sales tax system that we have, it really goes back to the Great Depression in the 1930s when the states started putting in their sales and use tax system. And ever since that time period, the states, when they were looking at interstate sales, and I'm focusing not on intrastate, but on interstate sales, they have always used this destination sourcing concept. In the Streamlined Sales Tax Agreement, as Craig had mentioned, there was some review of whether or not origin sourcing would work for interstate sales, and I think that was pretty quickly determined that that was not the way to go. And this is a group, but yet we need to remember it's not just state tax administrators. With the Streamlined Sales Tax Project, you've had state legislators, you've had local government associations, and you've had business and their business associations that have been part of this. So there's been a lot of work on destination sourcing through this project, and just looking at the historical perspective. Other concerns that I'd like to note is just looking at where are we right now. One of the things that Steve Del Bianco was talking about earlier on is that forcing some of these folks to have to collect other state sales taxes, that's going to be a change for them. Well, let's face it, we have a lot of remote sellers right now that are actually collecting the state's taxes. This is going to cause a change for those remote sellers and having to go to a new system. So we have a system already in place. Are we just upsetting the apple cart if all of a sudden we're going to force remote sellers that currently collect the other state's taxes to have to do something very different? And there's going to be programming, and the businesses are going to have training costs to make that change too, dealing with the system that they're used to now. I also think that there will be some serious customer confusion with this type of a place. New Hampshire, can you imagine what your New Hampshire residents are going to do when they start seeing other sales taxes invoiced on remote sale purchases that they make? My guess is the first thing they're going to do is they're probably going to call that seller. And when they call that seller, the seller hopefully can explain to them what's going on, or that person's just going to say, hey, ship this, take this good back. I don't want to pay this other state's tax. The other thing, if the purchaser has some confusion with whether or not the tax should apply in their case, who do they go to? Do they go to their state tax department? Do they go to New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Department of Revenue? They don't have anything to do with the sales or use tax. They go to the other state. They have to be able to figure out, what is the other state that imposed this tax. I see a lot of customer confusion that's going to create problems. The next point I'd like to talk about is this really leveling the playing field? A lot of the talk that, and issues that we've raised out there is that we have brick and mortar stores that are required to collect the tax, and you have these remote sellers that aren't collecting the tax. How does this level the playing field if everyone can still, the purchasers can go out there and shop the rate? They can simply go and look for which seller, as Mr. Massey was saying before, has the lowest sales tax rate. And we know that's probably something that's going to occur. So I see that as a major problem. We can't ignore constitutional concerns with this. The Equal Protection Clause, Congress does have the ability to regulate interstate commerce. They can take away Commerce Clause protection. They've done that for insurance companies. You've heard presentations from the insurance industry on that. But even when Commerce Clause protections were taken away to the insurance companies, they could still argue unfair tax treatment under the Equal Protection Clause, and they were successful in doing that. And Senator Bramble's not in the room right now, but he talked about something that's very important, I think, to all of you, and that is states' tax rights, the 10th Amendment and your rights. Does the federal government really have the ability, after an interstate transaction is completed, to say to all of you as state legislators, you have no right to impose your use tax? I think that's a big question. I'm not sure constitutionally the federal government has the ability to strip that away or not, something that needs to be explored. And then you need to look at the impact on exemptions. The states, don't you want to determine how your exemptions are going to apply to manufacturers, how not remote sales, but how sales for resale, whether or not that's a transaction that's going to be held to be a sale for resale are going to occur. Under this model, that's being proposed under hybrid origin sourcing. From the very basics that I can understand it, that's not going to be under control as you as the state from where the purchaser is located at. It's going to be the seller state. Does that make any sense? When you're granting a manufacturing exemption, you're granting that exemption based off the manufacturer's, that person's use of the product in a given state. It's not based off where the seller's, manufacturing and selling, and for someone that's going to use something very likely in a different jurisdiction. So that seems very backwards. And some of the states, you have made the policy decision, or you have a provision in your constitution that says you shouldn't tax food. All of a sudden, a purchaser buys something from outside the state. Should they be subject to a tax that you as policymakers or your constitution says that you shouldn't impose? That, to me, just seems extremely awkward. It also could interfere with tax credits that the states are providing to businesses that are making investment in the state. Oftentimes, there are some tax credits applied to the sales tax side, and how that would apply in hybrid origin sourcing, just simply don't know. And then there is a big fear about this proposal. If states see it as too burdensome, something that they don't want to adopt into the compact, aren't we just going to continue the current litigation that we have going on right now on what constitutes substantial nexus? And one of the things that was proposed out there in Steve Del Bianco's presentation, and I appreciate getting a little bit more details on it, is that you'd have to be an exclusive agent for the seller. Well, that does help a little bit, but, there's gray areas there.
Right.
If you're in the state for one day in a given year, is that enough, still? Or is that still too de minimis to constitute a physical presence? A lot of unresolved issues. And then I just have two last points I think are important to consider, especially when we're dealing with Congress and passing a bill, is the breadth of the legislation. One of the things that I heard about former bills introduced by Congress, typically it was called the Main Street Fairness Act, was that the bill was too long. They wanted a shorter version. That was the idea of what we're working on right now with the Marketplace Fairness Act. Well, everything I'm seeing with this hybrid sourcing, origin sourcing legislation is that it's probably going to have to be voluminous in size. I can't imagine that it's going to be able to be a simple 10-page bill. And how do you put together this compact and not have some details that are out there highlighted by Congress in passing the legislation? And then the last, which is important to all of you, is this really going to create a stable revenue base for the states? Our fear is that you're not going to trust the revenue that's going to come in because you don't know what's going to go through the compact exchange, and therefore you're going to have to rely and increase other taxes that you're imposing in your state. So with that, co-chairs and members of the task force, that be happy to answer any of your testimony, and we're very hopeful that we're eventually going to be able to see the details of this proposal to be able to say we are against it or okay with it.
Thank you. And Mr. Johnson and Mr. Nicely and members of the task force, NCSL staffers, because of my keen negotiation abilities, I have extracted from Mr. Del Bianco a promise that once the bill language is available to him, he will ensure that in a moment we will get a copy of that legislation. And I'm also going to go on and put you on the spot and ask to ensure that we still have the availability to talk about how that legislation is actually drafted and the stakeholders still have some access to changing that language and working with Chairman Goodlatte. And I'm certain he'll allow that as well. Questions? Representative Perrone from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Nicely. I just had a quick question. Has the credit rating agencies weighed in on the subject of revenue? My concern, to your last point you mentioned, is what the likelihood of or what the likely impact of on state revenue that this could have. And has there been any analysis? Have they looked into it? Have they offered any sort of opinion either way on origin source?
Yeah, as far as Moody's and the other agencies that rate the states for creditworthiness and the issuance of the public debt, I have not heard anything directly. I'm sure it's something that they do take in consideration, though, is how stable is the state sales and use tax base with remote sellers increasing in scope versus the brick and mortar stores.
Other questions for members? Yes, Assemblyman Conway, please.
The how well do you think that that your process, streamlining the sales tax, protects those small businesses in the local jurisdictions? I mean, it may be, everything we do. If we do nothing, there's a consequence. If we do something, there's a consequence. It may be that small businesses, for any number of reasons, shouldn't exist anymore. Manufacturing goes away. Something else takes over the economy. Maybe that we should not, in government, involve ourselves with these things and let the economic forces do what they will. But I think many people, and I would count myself among them, I think that we ought to be doing something to protect our local small businesses. Does the board believe that its activity, its solution will protect small business in the states?
Yeah, I think right now, the answer to that question is yes. And the reason is, one of the solutions that we offer for any remote sellers, and it's really any size business, whether it's a small business or a large business that has to collect tax on their remote sales, we offer a certified service provider solution. It's provided at no charge to those sellers for any of the states where they are a remote seller or a volunteer seller today. If there is an audit, which is obviously the big concern that people raise, well, what about 46 states coming in to do the audits? The audits are being done on the certified service provider, not on the volunteer seller. It's the certified service provider that provides the documentation. It's a certified service provider that takes on that liability because they're processing the transactions. Any transactions, obviously, that they don't process for that small business, they can't be held accountable for. But for the other ones, the states would hold the certified service provider liable. So from that perspective, I would say, yes, we are. I mean, we're protecting whether it's a small business or a large business by going through the certified technology. And the certified service providers, and I know there's a few of them that are in the room today, they can attest to it. It's not a simple process for them to become certified. Every one of the member states has looked at their systems and says, what you're doing in our state is correct, and we're certifying it. And once they've certified that, the states are also providing liability relief, saying, if we certified something and it's not correct, we're not going to hold you liable. We're going to tell you you made a mistake. Once you're notified of that, you have a period of time to get your system corrected. But until that time, we aren't going to hold you liable. So yes, I certainly do think that we're protecting the small business.
One more, Madam Chair, if
Yes,
I may.
please.
You mentioned in your comments that a number of, I guess, sellers are voluntarily paying a tax, and that surprised me, and I was wondering, I wanted to hear more about that. I'm assuming I was misunderstanding what you were saying when you said that folks were stepping forward and voluntarily paying, what was it, over $1 billion in, tax voluntarily.
And no, you did not misunderstand that. The Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board and our streamlined member states, we have a central registration system. We allow sellers to register in all 24 of our member states using one registration system. If they register through our system, they are agreeing to collect the tax in all 24 of our member states, regardless of any physical presence, regardless of any nexus in those states. So they are voluntarily collecting the tax. And again, we have over 2,300 of them, and I can tell you that that number has gone up on a month-over-month basis every month since I've been the executive director for the last 2+ years. And
There must be a good business reason for that.
well, part of the reason is, and I think that one of the strongest reasons is, the simplification and uniformity, and also the offering of the certified service providers. There's really no reason, there isn't an additional burden that's being put on those sellers to collect if they sign up with a certified service provider. Sure, they have to tell the certified service provider, here's the products that I'm selling. They know that because that's their business. But once the certified service provider system has that and they drop it into the right buckets, the tax treatment is computed for all 24 of our member states.
Yes, Representative Major?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I heard you right, what you said is that for small businesses, it would simplify things and make things much better for them. But isn't it true that for states that don't have sales tax, that it would complicate their business much more, be a greater burden, more regulation, and having to collect a tax that they never had to collect? So for small businesses in non-sales tax state, it would be horrible. Would you agree?
If I could just comment, I think it's something that's going to help small businesses and large businesses by providing the technology models to help them collect a tax. Now, is it going to be completely burden-free? I think, that would be disingenuous to say that there would be no burdens whatsoever. But, the idea is that there's going to be the software, the technology that's going to be used by the states to greatly assist those sellers in being able to collect their tax.
But my question was about a burden to small businesses in non-sales tax state. Is it true that it would be a greater burden with more regulations to these small businesses?
If those small businesses are located in a non-sales tax state, and let's say that's the only place they're located, right? That's their only physical presence.
That is correct.
But they're making sales and they're shipping them throughout the country, I would tell that small business, that's where you go contact one of our certified service providers. They will take care of handling all the tax calculation, return filing. And again, the small business will have to tell that certified service provider, here's the products that I have.
But isn't that adding a burden to that small business?
I guess if you consider adding a burden to be the fact that they have to explain what their business is to the certified service provider and what the products are that they're selling, yes, the answer would be yes, that would be.
Yeah, and Representative, if I could just interject.
Please,
I mean,
Fred.
understand, under hybrid origin sourcing, your small business is still going to be burdened in that situation because that small business is going to have to let your revenue agency know through the use of this clearinghouse what sales it had to purchasers that were located outside the state for it to be able to move that money to different locations.
And it will be a burden whether it's origin sourcing or destination sourcing, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. We go on, panel number 5, Mr. Joe Crosby of the Multi-State Associates, Joe Henchman from the Tax Foundation, and Steve Kranz from McDermott, Will, and Emery.
Thank you, Madam Chair, co-chairs, and members of the committee. My name is Joe Crosby. I'm a principal with Multi-State Associates based in Alexandria, Virginia. And Madam Chair, with your permission, we're actually going to share our time, if that's all right with you.
Oh, we are very delighted to hear that. Thank you.
For all three of us, it means 30 minutes.
And we'll ask my co-panelists to introduce themselves for the record.
Stephen Kranz, a partner with McDermott, Will, and Emery in Washington, D.C.
Joe Henchman with the Tax Foundation in Washington, D.C.
And Max, if you wouldn't mind loading the PowerPoint when you're ready, thank you. I'll start just with a brief overview, and I know it's a bit redundant for this panel, but I think it is helpful to remember where we came from and to set where we are. 15 years ago or so, late 1999, early 2000, NCSL, the National Governors Association, many businesses all came together to begin talking about ways to simplify and make more uniform the state and local sales and use tax system, to address the concerns raised by the Supreme Court in the Quill case, and to demonstrate to Congress that the states could solve this problem sufficient that the Congress should authorize the states to require remote sellers to collect tax if they so choose. And as Craig talked about when he was up here before, the states have done a remarkable job of that over the past 15 years, and 24 states have essentially have simplified and made essentially uniform their sales and use tax systems from the perspective of remote sellers. Congress has thus far failed to act. Part of the reason that Congress has failed to act is that there were many opponents of the streamlined sales tax project and the system that was created, including Mr. Del Bianco. He and others like him argued that the streamlined sales tax project was essentially a cartel, and that it was usurping the power of Congress. And as a result of that, this group and others went sort of back to the drawing board and said, well, I guess we need to create a simpler federal proposal, one that is more states' rights and had less simplification in it. And that was the legislation essentially that passed the Senate as the Marketplace Fairness Act in 2013. In response to that, then we had yet a new proposal, and I think many of you who have been here for a long time recall Mr. Del Bianco and others coming back to this organization and extolling you to return to the streamlined sales tax project for the simplifications contained therein that we had to abandon because of objections in Congress to the mandates on the states and others for all those simplifications. And so now we have before us this idea of hybrid origin sourcing. And before I turn it over to my co-panelists to get into the details, I think it's helpful just to level set and kind of understand what this is at a very high level. So the process that this organization has been undertaking for the past 15 years is to simplify the current system for all sellers. Remote sellers, brick and mortar sellers, purchasers, everyone engaged in the sales and use tax process, and to make it more uniform. The origin sourcing proposal, as we understand it, would be a new tax regime on top of the existing tax regime. It would require no simplification whatsoever of the existing system. So the streamlined states that have done that, that's wonderful. They would not be required to continue it. There would be no benefit for them to continuing it except for the benefits that it provides to brick and mortar sellers, which I'm sure would want it to continue. But there would be no impetus for states to continue to simplify their systems, which reduces deadweight loss on the entire economy. The simpler the sales and use tax systems are, the less money is wasted in this economy complying with sales and use tax laws. So instead of simplifying it, instead it would impose a new system on top of that that would apply only to remote sellers. Now, from the remote seller's perspective, hybrid origin or origin with right of return, whatever we're calling it now, would be relatively simple. What is not simple is the interaction between this new system and the existing system. They don't interact very well at all. And in fact, depending on what the exact proposal looks like, and as many others have said before, we don't actually have a proposal other than what we have received today and heard today. It's hard to evaluate exactly what that would be, but there's certainly constitutional issues, procedural issues, and all kinds of others. I'm sorry, I don't know if we need a moment here for technical difficulties. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to my co-panelists to start to talk. And Max, if you can just go ahead and advance, and we will riff on these as we go.
And Joe Crosby and I had the honor of testifying at the House Judiciary Committee in March of last year to talk about marketplace fairness and alternatives to marketplace fairness, and hybrid origin was one of the alternatives that was discussed. So much of what we're going to say today was covered in our testimony then. I think before we jump into the 7 deadly sins of hybrid origin, which is a great title, I will give credit to Joe Crosby for that. Before we jump into that, I'd like to say a couple of things. There's no other country in the world, no, not yet. There's no other country in the world that taxes consumption on an origin basis. And there's a good reason for it, and we'll go through 7 of them. But there's no other place in the world that does what is being proposed here today by Steve Del Bianco and Chris Cox at the March hearing. and I was thinking carefully on the plane ride here, how could I summarize this proposal in one sentence? And this is what I came up with, and I'm going to read it twice because it took a lot of thinking to capture it in one sentence. This proposal turns our consumption tax system into a production tax collected by the state where production occurs and then paid to the state where consumption occurs. Let me read that again. The proposal turns our consumption-based tax system into a tax on production collected by the state where production occurs and then paid to the state where consumption occurs. By doing that, it decouples the choice of how to tax a transaction from the jurisdiction that receives the tax and where consumption occurs. The seller state is making tax determinations, the tax rate, the exemptions. The seller state makes all of those decisions, but the money goes to the destination jurisdiction where consumption occurs. It doesn't make sense for us to have a consumption-based tax system that's driven by the rules in the state of production, the state where the seller is located producing and selling the goods or services that are the subject of the transaction. So fundamentally, there's this policy disconnect in what's being proposed that leads to some of the legal and practical and economic problems that we're going to be discussing.
And if I could just take a moment just to say, I'm someone who's been modestly supportive of a pure origin idea in the past. And one of the reasons I'm up here today, and we've written a paper on this and it's in the back there, is the problems associated with a hybrid approach, which in my opinion kind of take the worst aspects of destination and origin and put them together. And a lot of the details that you've heard about today of compacts that states may or may not decide to join, federal clearinghouse, two different taxation systems for online retailers versus brick and mortar retailers. It creates a lot of the problems that give strong concern to me.
Let's jump into the first slide, Max, which is really about the foreign seller concern. The proposal that's being made would be an exemption for foreign sellers, contrary to representations by Steve Del Bianco. If a foreign country does not have a sales tax that's imposed on outbound sales, there would be no tax rules to apply to foreign sales that are bound for U.S. customers. So I see the proposal as one that absolutely carves out and says, foreign sellers, you do not have to collect sales tax on sales to U.S. customers, putting U.S. businesses at a real disadvantage with foreign competition. Second, the proposal would be a tax imposed on exports. So U.S. companies that are selling to foreign consumers would be required to collect tax based on the seller's location, the seller's tax rate, and the seller's taxability. Now, there's been no description of what happens to that money. Does it go to the foreign country? Does the state of the seller's origin keep it? Or does it go to Joe Crosby and myself and Joe Henchman? That's the preferred option. But keep in mind, our first concern here is with international commerce and the discriminatory impact it has on U.S. companies competing with foreign sellers.
And I think it's important to understand this because this frequently gets misunderstood in the congressional debate. There's this concept out there that, well, there's really nothing that can be done. Even if MFA passes, foreign sellers still don't have to collect. It's important to understand that U.S. states are not bound by U.S. tax treaties. It's clear in every tax treaty that we enter into with foreign countries. In other words, jurisdictional limits that the U.S. government itself agrees to accept in return for foreign countries accepting those jurisdictional limits do not apply to states. When there is an interstate sale, there is no difference between whether the seller is in another state or the seller is in a foreign country. Right now, under current law, if that foreign non-U.S. seller does not have nexus in the state, just like a foreign seller that's in another state, they're not required to collect. If MFA passes or some similar bill that gives states the authority to require remote sellers to collect, it applies equally to sellers in other states as it does to sellers in foreign countries. There is the practical question of how states can enforce the law against a foreign seller if a foreign seller chooses voluntarily to ignore that. The reality is most large businesses seek to comply with all the laws and regulations in the jurisdictions in which they do business. Many U.S. sellers without any physical presence in the European Union are currently collecting VAT because they're required to do so. Would there be scofflaws?
Sure.
Yes, but there are scofflaws all the time. We currently have sellers that don't comply with the sales tax laws in their own states. We can't predicate a law based on the fact that some people will ignore it. The vast majority of law-abiding businesses would collect tax. Under the origin sourcing proposal, it is a specific legal exemption for foreign commerce. That is a huge distinction.
Passed by Congress. And yeah, Joe, there are numerous enforcement tools outside of the tax treaties that can be used for states that want to enforce the obligation on particular scofflaws. Looking back at Mr. Del Bianco's presentation, he says neither MFA nor the Judiciary Bill can make foreign sellers collect your sales tax. He uses that as an excuse not to pass a law. You can't make somebody comply with it. Well, that's like saying we shouldn't have a speed limit because adopting a speed limit doesn't make people obey the speed limit. It's absurd. Arguing that we shouldn't have a law because some people are going to ignore the law, it doesn't make any sense. So there are tools to address the foreign seller issue under MFA, but there are no tools under hybrid origin.
I know we talk about Commerce Clause a lot associated with these issues. Constitution, of course, is a much bigger document, and there's two other provisions that come up when you start thinking about a hybrid origin proposal. I want to start with the Due Process Clause first, and then we'll do the Equal Protection Clause. Due Process Clause, hybrid origin probably violates it. And as I said, in the paper that we wrote, primer on the Marketplace Fairness Act and the alternatives, we go into more detail about all of this. But just to give an example, Representative Almy and Major, you've asked quite a few questions about the impact on New Hampshire retailers, because under hybrid origin, they would have to start collecting sales tax. Your retailers would have to start collecting sales tax, which they currently don't do, of course, because New Hampshire doesn't have a sales tax. I've been to nearly every state in the country. I have yet to have the pleasure to visit New Hampshire. So right now I have what in Supreme Court parlance is terms no minimum contacts with New Hampshire. I have no connection with the state whatsoever. Under hybrid origin, however, if I bought something from one of those New Hampshire retailers that would then be forced to collect sales tax, I would be subject to New Hampshire's sales tax system. I would have to pay whatever rate, if you guys adopted one, if you guys had one. Yes, I know it's 0, Representative Major, but if you did have one, I would be subject to the rates, the rules, the audits, everything, even though I've never stepped foot in the state of New Hampshire. And that is unconstitutional under the Due Process Clause. Similarly, there's potentially an issue related to the Equal Protection Clause, specifically because hybrid origin, at least as it's been described, is only limited to online sales. And the system with brick and mortar sales will continue to be different. So you have somebody like me who lives in the District of Columbia buying from different sellers and paying different tax rates based on the seller, even though all the sales occurred to me as the taxpayer within the District of Columbia, and potentially an equal protection violation there.
So contrary to what we heard earlier today, and Mr. Johnson went through this, so we don't have to belabor it too much, all states use destination sourcing for interstate sales. That's all we're talking about here. We're not talking about what you do within your own states. You should still be able to do whatever you want within your own states. The burden of general sales taxes today is on the consumer. Some would argue that, oh, well, in Illinois, it's the retailer's occupation tax, and the retailer's required to pay it. It's true. But that's true in a few other states, and in every one of those states, the retailer is either legally required to or allowed to pass the tax on to the consumer. And in most states, it's actually a violation of law not to require the consumer to pay. To argue that under current law, that the business is the ultimate bearer of the burden of the tax is the same thing as saying when your employer withholds your income tax, they're actually paying it, you're not. When you pay your property tax on your monthly mortgage statement, if your mortgage company's collecting that, they're actually paying it, you're not. When you pay your Social Security taxes through your employer, they're actually paying it, you're not. It's no different. In all of these cases, we all know it's the consumer paying the tax. The most interesting thing to me at the hearing, when we all testified about this, is the argument was put forth that indeed this would not be a new tax, that the hybrid origin, I should say, and that in fact, right now, it's actually the business paying the tax in many of these states. Not one single member of Congress that talked about it bought that. They all reacted with a little surprise that anyone would think that any of the folks here or others that have thought about this for more than 5 minutes would really think that it's someone other than the consumer paying the tax.
I think the only other point I'd note here is that were the hybrid origin proposal to become law federally, it would require each of the states that wanted to join the compact to radically rewrite their sales tax laws. It is not simply pass federal legislation and then sellers start collecting under this regime. It would require a massive rewrite of each of the state's laws in order for them to sync up with the federal legislation. Unlike right now, where we've got the Marketplace Fairness Act, which has been designed and its infrastructure works with existing sales tax regimes around the country, this proposal would not work with your existing laws today.
And as we've all heard many times, without an actual proposal, it's hard to see. But I have a conceptual maybe failure to understand how the Congress can actually authorize you to authorize your sellers to require a seller in a foreign jurisdiction to pay your tax. I mean, I don't know where Congress gets that power. They may be able to authorize you to require your sellers to collect tax on those sales, but then to actually pass it forward to the consumer, I'm not sure where Congress gets that authority. I may be misunderstanding it, but I don't understand.
I mean, it would be surprising, and if, say New Hampshire doesn't join this compact that would be set up, can Congress still compel New Hampshire retailers to start collecting this tax? That would be very strange.
Or compel New Hampshire residents to pay the tax to the other states. I don't understand that.
Yeah, both of them present real constitutional issues, 10th Amendment issues that we've seen summarily rejected by Mr. Del Bianco with no real legal basis for that.
I mean, this has come up, and I think this one is the easiest one for all of us to understand. Dumbfounded consumers. When Representative Major's constituent goes to buy something online like he or she has been doing for 10 or 15 years, and all of a sudden has to pay a sales tax, I guarantee you they will be dumbfounded. And the argument that I have heard that when you purchase on the internet, it is exactly the same as traveling to that state in a virtual way, I don't think will really win the argument with consumers. I think they will say, no, I'm actually still in my living room. I traveled nowhere, and I don't understand why I'm paying a sales tax. Or a person like me in the state of Maine, we have a sales tax. It's a relatively low rate, 5.5%. When I purchase something from a vendor that happens to be based in Tennessee and now I'm paying 10%, it certainly will not sit well with me. And I just don't understand, again, maybe I'm just missing something, the argument that consumers will understand this because they'll know they have virtually traveled somewhere else.
And the one-sentence version here is, for your constituents, exemptions that have been adopted by your legislature that apply to your constituents no longer apply. Your laws in terms of what's exempt, food, clothing, drugs, durable medical equipment, manufacturing exemptions, sale for resale exemptions, all of it is out the window when your constituents are buying from a seller located in another state. All of the exemptions will be determined by that other state's legislature. Now, there have been justifications offered for that it fosters tax competition among the states. And as I said at the March hearing in House Judiciary, it's the nuclear bomb of tax competition. It decimates the sales tax system as we know it, and states will be forced to either eliminate their sales tax or businesses, as you heard from Mr. Macy, will be forced to relocate to stay in business.
Now, obviously, any origin system, whether pure or hybrid, requires a vigorous definition of where origin is, whether that be where the company has the most employees, where they're incorporated, where their headquarters are, where the order was accepted, where the goods were shipped from, where the web server is located. Any of those could potentially be the origin location. And any type of bill, again, we haven't seen the language, needs to really be clear on that. Now, in the March hearing, Chris Cox, who's testifying in favor of hybrid origin, he suggested the number of employees standard would be the best. So wherever the company has the most employees, that would be origin. But he conceded that additional language would probably be needed to describe additional instances where that wouldn't be an appropriate standard. And that really potentially opens the floodgates on some manipulations.
As a state tax lawyer who makes a living representing companies and helping them understand the law, understand their compliance obligations, and minimize their tax burdens, I would actually love this. I would set up shop immediately to begin helping online retailers manipulate their location so that they did not have to begin charging tax. Any of the standards that have been offered, whether they're the employees, the headquarters, the ship from address, are easily manipulated. I could set up a corporation in Delaware within 10 minutes from now, online, put one person into it, and there are firms in Delaware who offer their people, if you want to set up an entity in Delaware and put a person into it, there are firms there who will do that. I could use that entity as the seller of record, and Mr. Macy may not have to relocate his business. We'll just put the seller of record in Wilmington. Mr. Macy sells to that entity and it sells to consumers, and now the tax at the origin is zero. So this is a system that invites manipulation no matter what the standard is that's articulated in the federal legislation. It cannot close the loopholes that it creates.
And in fact, Steve, the new information we heard this morning supports that, because one could argue, well, we'll put aggregation rules together so that companies can't break themselves up and set up one here and one there, and this one's doing the selling and this one's doing something else. Well, the bill's going to have a definition of physical presence that says if you're not an exclusive agent, then you don't have physical presence. Okay, so you get that person in Delaware to do this essentially as a shopping place for multiple sellers. Well, they're not an exclusive agent anymore. That doesn't create physical presence. Therefore, you get to sell tax-free.
Don't give away all my tax planning ideas,
Hey,
Joe.
I don't even do this stuff, but you know, some of it's pretty easy to figure out.
The new tax. Well, and we've heard a lot about this. Obviously, in the no sales tax states, this is a new tax. Your states have opted not to rely on sales tax as a source of revenue. The hybrid origin system would result in them paying a new tax that doesn't exist today. New tax over and over again.
Right, and I think, Steve, that clearly, although as we've heard, members of Congress don't always buy this argument, but the legal reality is the Marketplace Fairness Act and similar bills do not create a new tax. They do make it easier for states to require people to pay the taxes that are already legally due and owed. This would affirmatively create a new tax. If you're a resident in New Hampshire and you buy from a state with a sales tax, you're paying a tax. That's a new tax. If you're a resident in a state with a low sales tax rate and you pay in a state with a higher sales tax rate, that's a new tax. If you live in any sales tax state where what you're purchasing is exempt and you're purchasing it in a state without an exemption, it's a new tax. I really don't understand how this one even can be combative.
When we look at the Tax Foundation's got a great page on their website with the state rate plus the average local rate. And when we look at tax rates around the country, we see that there are some very high rates out there. Louisiana is one of them, California is another, Washington State, Arkansas. There are a bunch of high rate states, and then they go on down to the lowest rates in the no sales tax states. This is also a new tax when you are in, as a consumer, if you are in a state with a lower rate and you're buying from a vendor that's located in a higher rate. So think about California companies selling around the country. California is one of the highest rates, and all of its vendors would have to collect that high rate no matter where they were shipping to around the country. So it's a new tax on consumers to the extent they're buying from vendors who are located in the top half, and they're below that in terms of their destination. Anything else on that? Or the other thing on the tax rate side, as you heard from Mr. Macy, if you are a business, there's a negative impact on consumers when they're buying from a higher rate jurisdiction. If you are a business that's located in one of the high rate jurisdictions, you're either out of business or you need to move to survive. And so I think this proposal would have a dramatic impact, not only on consumers, but on businesses as well.
Joe, did you have another comment?
And finally, state sovereignty is trampled upon. I think we all understand this. I mean, Senator Bramble's question earlier got right to this point. It's the first time that I'm aware of where the federal government would be mandating to the states a sales tax regime. And that's exactly what would be happening. The Marketplace Fairness Act and other similar bills all leave undisturbed the underlying concept of sales tax as it's known in the states today, and simply say, if you'd like authority to require remote sellers to collect, you need to reduce the burden on them of doing so, which many states have already voluntarily done. This instead imposes an entirely new sales tax regime on the states to the extent they want to engage in it, and to the extent they don't, then it doesn't solve the problem.
The economic evidence is strongly that income and business taxes have more economic distortions than consumption taxes, like sales taxes. They're all of those taxes are important to state finance, of course, but to the extent this pushes states away from consumption taxes towards taxes on production, that would be very problematic for our economic growth as a country.
Thank you all very much. Any questions?
In the state of Connecticut, we have something called a sales tax exemption on inputs for manufacturing. Is it conceivable that if you have two states that are relatively competitive in the same manufacturing category, but state A sources materials from the competing state for whatever reason for the inputs in manufacturing, could conceivably state B then charge slightly higher rate, basically manipulate their own tax scheme to hurt competitively, state A, first state.
Yes, absolutely. So, and you've hit upon, I think, what one of the biggest issues here. We talk a lot about consumers buying stuff that they use, but that's not what the sales and use tax is. It's a tax on all kinds of things, including those purchased by businesses. 40%, depending on what study you look at, of all sales taxes paid are paid by businesses on their own purchases. And you've got an exemption for machinery and equipment. Most states have that, but not all. Not all. Nevada doesn't. California, it goes back and forth with having one, and it's limited in how it does it, which is why there's not been a whole lot of new computer chip fabrication plants that have been based in California, because for a long period of time you'd have to pay sales tax on that $70 million piece of equipment you'd buy. So yes, so it would absolutely have an impact, and you absolutely could manipulate it by exempting from tax things that your state is more likely to export rather than import. It really would change the nature of the sales tax completely.
Okay. So I'll sleep better tonight, thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
I'm sorry. You had
No, it was your.
Okay.
On the question about the states' rights, one of Chairman Goodlatte's principles that in Mr. Del Bianco's testimony, states' rights, states should be sovereign within their physical boundaries. We've been told that this is like point of sale. You're in California, you should pay California sales taxes. You do. So if it is a point of sale, and California has sovereign right over that sale, and we've been told now that this virtual sale, or the sale online, is a point of sale. So why shouldn't California, if they decide not to join the compact, have to tax something that is a point of sale under their proposal? I mean, shouldn't they have the authority over that point of sale?
Well, and states right now do have the authority to do whatever they wanted.
Right.
If California wanted to impose a production tax on any business that was located there on its sales to out-of-state customers, it could do that. But it's silly from a policy perspective to do that, which is why no state in the country has imposed a tax on production. This system would turn our consumption tax into a production tax.
But you're right. They could do it without joining the compact.
Right.
Right.
And then they could keep all the money.
Right. But under the compact, whether they join the compact or not, under this proposal, they have to start charging a tax on those point of sale, virtual online point of sales, even though they're not in the compact under this federal legislation.
That's what we heard today.
I was going to say it's unclear to me. I've heard multiple things, so I don't really know what the answer is to that. But yes, I mean, and to the extent that were to occur, then you would definitely encounter double taxation, because if they're required to collect at the point of sale, but they don't join the compact, then they could also impose use tax on their consumers because they didn't join the compact and thus didn't give up the right to do that.
Unless Congress does a broad preemption of all state use taxes.
If they can.
Well, I don't, which raises a whole set of constitutional concerns as well. So it's not clear how this could ever work constitutionally, practically. I mean, we came up with 7, but there are no end of sins associated with hybrid origin.
We just focused on the grievance, not the vehicle.
Right. So it does indeed trample on states' rights.
Unquestionably. In our research, I think it tramples on states' rights in a way that's absolutely unprecedented, that Congress has never done in its history.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I wondered, you mentioned this disconnect between the sort of production tax and a I guess, what was it, a point of origin tax. And just stepping back from that, it seems to me that one of the things that has driven that kind of proposal is the change in the way people purchase things today. The economy's changed, and states, I think, are trying to figure out how to evolve their tax systems to meet the challenge of that change, thinking as they must about their local economies, what's going on with their small businesses and the like. I'm in New Jersey. Delaware is right next to us. I'm in South Jersey. It's nothing for me to go across the line and buy something, I guess, at zero sales tax. Scofflaws. If I bought something in January, the year before, would I remember that I bought, I don't know, a computer or something to make sure it got on my income tax, which I guess is one of the problems. I mean, people, I think, very typically, enforcement of those kinds of transactions, I think, is clearly very difficult, and people might become scofflaws, not even intending to be so, because it's hard to remember if you're buying things all year that, oh, geez, I bought this thing in Delaware or a low-tax jurisdiction. How do you think, what should states do then, in your opinion, looking at this? You're the tax expert locally. I mean, how do states deal with this, the real concerns that their constituent businesses will have about the number of sales that are coming in from out of state, competing with them with different rules that are driving them out of business? What are states to do?
You're absolutely,
in your opinion.
You're absolutely correct in that, we face a challenge right now. How do we modernize the sales tax to reflect a base that is significantly different from what it was in the 1930s when most sales taxes were set up, while at the same time bearing in mind that state powers are limited with respect to interstate commerce, and we want to make sure that we don't put all these, make it also complicated for interstate businesses that it brings the national economy to a halt. So, I think you're from New Jersey, correct?
Yes.
New Jersey is one of the rare states which has one sales tax rate and one sales tax base covering the whole state. Nationwide, we have, at last count, 9,998 different sales tax jurisdictions. And that's obviously can be very complicated, especially when there's a lot of different rules and so forth. I think the proper approach, though, is to fix that. Make sure that there's easy ways of complying with all of those rules and regulations. Make sure that audits are not a free-for-all of all the states, that there's rules associated with it. Hybrid origin doesn't do that. Hybrid origin keeps all of those problems and then layers a new tax system on top of everything specifically for online businesses, and I don't think that's a good policy solution.
So how does that get fixed? I mean, you mentioned that problem. How would you go about? I mean, so that means that those states that are not, New Jersey has its problems. It's nice to see that that's something that has this, that we have a simplification there. But
Yeah.
this sounds like that's going to be a state-controlled process to perhaps simplify their own tax rules the way New Jersey has done.
Well, I think the approach
maybe we're not right, by the way, but
the general approach of the Marketplace Fairness Act, which is an overarching federal structure which requires certain simplifications by the states to participate, and New Jersey is the rare state that's already in compliance with it, and it's good to go. I think that's a more fruitful approach. Now, I think there's improvements that can be done to the MFA. I detail them in the paper, and it's my understanding that the Chaffetz draft coming out soon incorporates some of them, but taking the current system and fixing some of its problems with it, and making sure that it will work in a new framework, is a more fruitful approach than coming up with something untested and new that has a lot of problems.
And I would just add that, that we should focus on the issues we know we can solve. As long as we live in a country with open borders and open economies within the state, which I hope is forever, then we're always going to have individuals crossing borders to make transactions, and they may or may not comply with the tax laws. But we shouldn't look at designing systems to fix those. We should fix the problems that we know we can fix. The issue of remote sales we can fix. It simply requires Congress to say, yes, the states are ready. You heard that from Craig Johnson earlier. It's really, yes, there would be some need for some sort of time, which the federal bills have all built in to allow for the transition, but it's doable, and we should do this rather than imposing some new system.
Yeah, it's really, is the solution here some version of MFA or the Main Street Fairness Act, or there have been numerous bills introduced in Congress over the last 15 years that all had different simplification requirements. Simplification, uniformity, and technology are the right way to solve this problem. We don't need an upheaval of our consumption tax system, replacing it or overlaying it with a production tax system to solve the problem. That just creates a whole new set of issues and economic distortions that are not necessary.
That sounds right to me, Madam Chair. Through the chair, if I may, why won't the Congress just say yes, in your opinion?
Well, it's my opinion that if this were brought to the floor of both chambers, it would pass. That there is sufficient number of votes in both chambers to pass the bill.
Which bill? Which bill?
Any of the Marketplace Fairness Act-like proposals.
Okay. Representative Majors.
No, not the hybrid origin. I haven't seen such a bill, so I wouldn't know how to evaluate it.
Well, but a bill that raises taxes,
No, yeah.
No, I'm just saying, a bill that raises taxes for many Americans. You mentioned before, Steve, the states like Washington State, California, that have high sales taxes. A lot of them are the homes of a lot of those IT companies, Amazon. And if you're one of those states that are not with a lower sales tax, by voting for a hybrid origin sourcing bill, you're increasing the taxes on your constituents. How many members of Congress would ever vote for something like that?
I also think there's an issue of misleading framing, the argument being, this is going to tax the internet, and if we don't pass it, then the internet will be untaxed. I don't think that's the case. I think if Congress does nothing, continues to do nothing, what you're going to see is more, no offense, Assemblyman Ortiz, more things like what New York did, where striking out on their own and passing their own legislation that doesn't have any simplifications, and it doesn't solve any of these interstate problems, doesn't try to set up any overarching framework, and does that. And I think anecdotally, a lot of states are going to continue going down that path unless Congress does something, and that's a problem for the national economy.
Not just something. I think if Congress were to do something in hybrid origin, states would still continue on the path that they're doing because it doesn't solve anything from a state's perspective.
Representative Majors.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've heard the panel this morning go through all the reasons why the hybrid origin sourcing tramples states' rights. My question is, but doesn't the Marketplace Fairness Act trample the states' rights of states that don't have a sales tax?
Representative Major, I answer that this way. So under the Marketplace Fairness Act, businesses that are located in New Hampshire would be required to collect taxes when they voluntarily enter the market of another state by selling into that state. Under hybrid origin, they would either be required to collect or provide information, so the same thing. Plus, New Hampshire residents would now be required to pay taxes when they purchase out of state. I actually am, in the business community, of the perspective that states don't own businesses. That the businesses that are there are not the state's businesses. They are your residents. The businesses, when they operate in 50 states, are the businesses of all the states in which they operate. And if they're selling into those states, then they have a responsibility to comply with those laws. Right now they are, if they're remote sellers, because the Supreme Court has said they can't collect. But so our opinions probably differ there. I still think on balance, if Congress is going to do one or the other, you have a choice between your businesses collecting tax or a choice between your businesses collecting tax and your residents paying tax. And that's what hybrid origin does. So it may be the lesser of two evils for you, but it's still the lesser.
And it still is trampling on the rights of our citizens and our businesses in the state of New Hampshire, because a state is made up of citizens. It's made up of businesses. And our laws says that businesses do not have to collect sales tax in our state. And what you're doing now is you're forcing them to collect sales tax. So it is trampling on their rights. You're using the same excuse for the hybrid origin sourcing.
I mean, we'll respectfully disagree. I know we've all enjoyed this discussion for a long time. I would say the difference is that the business chooses to engage in business in another state. And so when they choose, they are making themselves subject to all manner of the other state's law. If that business today sells into the other state and sells a product that is defective, they can be sued. They can be brought into that state's courts. They have due process nexus with the other state. The only thing they're protected from is collecting the sales tax. They're not protected from any of the other states' laws. So your New Hampshire businesses, when they make those sales, they subject themselves to those other states' laws. They just don't subject themselves to sales tax because the Supreme Court has prevented that.
That's what I'm talking about, subject to the sales tax.
Any other discussion? Anyone? Fine, thank you all very much, okay? Then we have one more panel. It's Leslie Fox, Joe Rinsel, and Michelle Bernstein. Welcome.
Thank you. Who wants to start? You want me to start? I'll start. Thank you so much, Chairman Perone, Chairwoman Hickson, and task force members. My name is Leslie Fox. I'm the Director of Legislative Outreach for the International Council of Shopping Centers. Thank you so much for the opportunity to submit testimony about origin and hybrid origin sourcing concepts as they relate to sales tax collection on remote sales. This issue is a top priority for the International Council of Shopping Centers, and we've been engaged in efforts to level the playing field for community-based retailers for more than 15 years. ICSC values the years of work and dedication by this task force to thoroughly examine this issue and appreciates being a part of these discussions. ICSC is the premier global trade association for the shopping center industry. It's more than 60,000 members in over 90 countries, include shopping center owners, developers, managers, marketing specialists, investors, retailers, and brokers, as well as academics and public officials. Serving as the economic backbone of communities across our country, the shopping center industry continues to be an important part of our nation's economy. In 2013, retail real estate accounted for 12.5 million jobs in the U.S. alone, representing 9.2% of total employment. For every 100 individuals directly employed at a regional shopping center, an additional 20 to 30 jobs are supported in the community due to multiplier effects. In 2013, shopping centers were responsible for generating $138.6 billion in state sales tax revenue and $22.4 billion in property taxes. Now, contrary to what the general public might think, shopping centers and the players who make up our industry are in the midst of one of the most exciting periods of evolution since the rise of the suburban mall in the 1950s. The principal driver of this evolution has been the rapid development and implementation of technologies that have revolutionized the way individuals and businesses interact with each other and the world around them. Specifically, the internet and e-commerce are providing consumers and retailers with brand new tools that enhance the shopping experience and ultimately drive sales in stores. However, in order for us to realize the full opportunities with this evolving retail environment, it's critical that our sales tax policies are updated in a way that supports these new technologies and ensures a level playing field for all types of retailers. Now, ICSC has several problems with the concepts of origin and hybrid origin sourcing that we've been talking about. Again, none of us have actually seen any language or legislative language to be able to look at those issues directly. But as far as what we've heard, we believe that the concepts that have been discussed today don't address the current sales tax collection environment appropriately. We're concerned that any origin-based option does not level the playing field for retailers, and that it actually creates a more complex process that inhibits states from properly collecting sales tax revenues that are due. Let's examine our first and primary concern of safeguarding free market competition in the retail marketplace. As a result of the current policy environment, online-only retailers enjoy as much as a 10% competitive price advantage. In order to restore this fair competition in the marketplace, we need a solution that would end what amounts to a government-endorsed subsidy for one group of retailers in this segment. That means treating all sales the same, regardless of if they take place on Main Street, in a mall, through the click of a mouse, or on the phone. Legislation grounded in destination-based sourcing accomplishes that goal. Conversely, under the origin and hybrid origin sourcing concepts that have been discussed, sales would not be treated the same. The sales tax paid on a purchase would depend on where the retailer is located, so in some cases a remote seller would charge a lower rate than a brick-and-mortar retailer. ICSC believes that an origin-based structure would ultimately encourage online sellers to game the system by incorporating in states with no sales tax in order to gain a competitive advantage by not collecting the sales tax. One of the most important aspects of this debate to ICSC and our members is that when this issue is resolved, we are no longer faced with a disparate tax structure or an environment where differing tax rates would be a factor in the consumer's buying decision. Economists agree that when taxes influence the purchasing decision, the government is distorting the free market. As a result, origin sourcing concepts do not accomplish the goal of protecting a free and fair marketplace. Furthermore, since the purchaser is the taxpayer and not the seller, as is sometimes erroneously suggested, it is ICSC's belief that the tax should be collected based upon where the purchaser or their designee takes possession of the product, whether it is at a physical store where the product is sent. This destination approach is the most appropriate manner of sourcing and reflects the realities of the current marketplace. Another area of significant concern for ICSC is that the proposed hybrid origin idea does not simplify the sales tax collection process. Rather, it adds complexity and confusion, thereby preventing states from efficiently and effectively collecting the revenue that they are due. Now, the panel before us talked about a number of these complexities, and I've outlined some in the testimony, the written testimony that we've provided to all of you. So I won't go through and list all of them because they've already been discussed. However, what we will say is that we share the concerns of the panel before us, and we believe that this really outlines the unworkable nature of a hybrid origin concept. As we have seen over the years, as the sales tax base has shrunk, other taxes on businesses and residents have often increased to make up the difference. As a result, not only are community-based retailers losing sales to online retailers that have a competitive price advantage, but they are also shouldering a greater tax burden to cover these lost tax revenues. By broadening their tax base through collection of all sales and use taxes, states can avoid tax increases and use the revenue to reduce other taxes that may be more harmful to the economy. In his 2013 study, Pro-Growth Tax Reform and E-Fairness, renowned economist Arthur Laffer found that a more efficient sales tax system would improve states' prosperity and employment, increasing GDP by $563.2 billion and adding over 1.5 million jobs over the next 10 years. ICSC strongly supports the efforts that have been initiated in several states to lower taxes based on the potential of a broader tax base. Unfortunately, the hybrid origin concept that has been presented today allows for continued loopholes and complexities that would prevent states from realizing the necessary efficiencies to make these reductions and offsets. As this task force considers policies that address sales tax collection on remote sales, ICSC encourages you to strive for a solution that would best end the sales tax disparity among remote sellers and brick-and-mortar stores, reduce loopholes in the system, and allow states to effectively collect the taxes that are owed. We believe that there is a way to provide significant simplification for remote sales tax collection for all retailers and create a level playing field that encourages the exciting innovations that the current omni-channel revolution in retail can provide. The good news is that the same technology-driven environment that is bringing us these new shopping experiences has already addressed the issue of sales tax collection in a destination-based tax system. Ironically, an origin or hybrid origin scheme would create unnecessary complexities that would stifle this pioneering environment and undermine the existing systems already utilized by thousands of remote and community-based retailers to collect sales taxes. Thank you for taking the time today to review origin and hybrid origin sourcing. It's ICSC's hope that this fundamentally flawed scheme will be tabled absolutely, and that the national debate on how we address tax collection of remote sales can move forward with a focus on a more workable and equitable model. I appreciate the opportunity to address you today, and I'm happy to take any questions after the rest of the panelists have spoken.
Thank you very much. Joe?
Thank you. I'm Joe Renslow. I work with the Retail Industry Leaders Association. One of the benefits from being on the last panel today is that most everything has already been discussed. But I think it's important for the organizations here, RELA included, to express our lack of support for a hybrid origin regime. I think from RELA's perspective, and for those of you that might not know, we represent most of the larger format retailers that operate in all 50 states. For us, this issue has always been about a fair marketplace, about parity at the point of sale, 100% parity at the point of sale. We heard our earlier panelist talk about a sale should be treated as a sale, as a sale is a sale. We agree with that. We don't think that's accomplished with a hybrid origin system because you don't get 100% parity at point of sale in all transactions. So this effort would unfortunately codify a system that's already in place where you don't have that parity that's so important to our membership in terms of competition in a free marketplace. Just a couple points to drive home. Again, as many people have said, we haven't seen language. We're encouraged by Chairman Goodlatte's desire to address the issue. That's certainly an important step. He is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee and has an important voice in this process. We were encouraged by the fundamental principles that he released last year, but unfortunately we were discouraged that no legislation came forward in terms of a markup. We hope that changes this year so that we can finally get to a conclusion here. From the concepts that we're aware of that have been discussed today, I just wanted to point out a couple things that remain concerned that have not been addressed from our perspective, although again, they might be in language as it moves forward, is about the opportunity for the non-sales tax states and how they would address this. This concept of data sharing, of a retailer providing purchasing information from the consumer to the state is something that was attempted, I believe, in Colorado, and other states have looked at that model, and they haven't had a lot of success. From a retailer's perspective, that's not something we would really be supportive of. The idea that you're taking the consumer's information about what they purchased, how much they purchased and how much tax they might owe, and collecting that data and providing it is certainly an issue of concern for us in the privacy debate that's also ongoing, across the country. So that process causes us some great concerns. The idea that this is based on the fuel tax system, which, as I understand it, is about one commodity and a relatively simple ability for the states to get together. The reason that that's not a huge process is that you're dealing with one commodity and roughly one rate. We're talking about literally billions of transactions and millions of products. I'm not sure what the cost would be associated from state to state to implement something like that, but I imagine there would be a significant burden put on the state to put those processes in place. So those reasons, and a lot of other issues have been discussed today, and again, we won't go into all of them, but those are the main points that we have a lot of concern with this concept, and we continue to support efforts on the Hill and in DC to address this issue in cooperation with the states, again, to get to the end of the day where we have a true fair marketplace where everybody's competing on price, on service, and not having a tax advantage handed to us, handed to some but not all. And that's where we stand, and we remain committed to addressing this issue in this upcoming Congress.
Thank you very much. Next is Rochelle Bernstein.
Thank you very much. I am Rochelle Bernstein, Vice President and Tax Counsel for the National Retail Federation. I thank you all for your patience in staying here through a long morning to listen to the problems here. I actually wanted to be last today because I wanted to give you the perspective from the National Retail Federation, which is the largest retail trade association. We are an umbrella group that includes both large and small businesses. We include in our membership pure play internet sellers, we include pure brick and mortar sellers, and we include the many retailers that do both, sell both within stores and over the internet or remotely as well. For our organization, we have the same problem that you all have. We need to find a solution that levels the playing field and takes away the disadvantage to our retailers in their stores that provide so much to your communities, but yet does not impose an unfair compliance burden on our small internet sellers. Hybrid origin sourcing does not provide that solution. I think you heard earlier from Mr. Massey, who's local, from a very high tax jurisdiction, 9%. There is no way that he can have a fair deal, whether he sells in his stores or over the internet with a proposal like hybrid origin sourcing. So there are other ways, we believe, to achieve simplicity without putting retailers from high-tax states at such a competitive disadvantage. I think the proposals, Mr. Massey told you that he would easily trade collection to be able to get those additional sales. He told me privately, $49 a month to have his software system calculate and process sales tax around the country is a drop in the bucket compared to what he's losing in sales when he tries to sell over the internet. If the next part of the problems we talk about, so there's the simplicity. When I told him there were proposals in Congress that would say that the states will pay for that software, you won't end up bearing that $49 burden. And in addition, some of the things that are being discussed that I know that you've heard about would also alleviate the potential audit burdens for a small business like his. He thought that was just icing on the cake. So simplicity could be achieved, and a level playing field could be achieved. And you don't take retailers in very high tax states and just put them at such a disadvantage. The next issue that's out there was set up by Mr. Del Bianco. It was the fairness issue, which we can't achieve with hybrid origin sourcing. And then there's the revenue issue. Obviously, that's an issue for all of you. You all put together state budgets. You determine the taxes that you're going to, the types of taxes that you're going to impose on the citizens in your states and the amount of money that you expect to collect. With hybrid origin sourcing, you obviously you have no idea, because based on the sales tax system you all have put in, that's not what you're necessarily collecting. You're collecting based on what some other state has done. My concern representing retailers is if you don't get the revenue that you budgeted, you will increase your taxes to be able to achieve the revenue target that you've budgeted. Now, some have talked about maybe you would move to income taxes. I hear in certain states, like when I meet with Texas representatives, that they think there's no way that they would ever move to an income tax from a sales tax. Well, does that mean that you raise that already high Texas sales tax even higher? Then there's no way that your Texas retailers will be able to compete under a system like the hybrid origin sourcing system. So putting this all together, I'm so glad that what we're discussing today is not should collection be done, but how should it be done. We need that system that does provide both fairness and simplicity. Unfortunately, it's not hybrid origin sourcing, but I do think some of the other proposals that Congress is looking at and developing, and there are improvements being made all along, will solve the problems of the small internet sellers that I work with and people like Mr. Massey, who is here today.
Thank you all very much. Any questions from the members of the panel? Yes, sir.
It sounds like that the streamlined sales tax proposal is something that you would favor. Is that that's a fair statement? And the other question was, you mentioned not sharing consumer information because one of the reasons that drives this effort now to get at fairness is those out-of-state transactions. And I don't know if the legislature can do this or not, just thinking about the makeup of our own legislature. If we wanted to go after the folks buying cars in Delaware, for instance, and not, or smaller items, washing machines and computers and things like that for people who live in the southern part of our state, that's something that is fairly commonly done, and I imagine quite a lot of it is not reported. Requiring retailers to tell us who or states who might have made those transactions. Now, again, I don't know if a bill like this could pass, but it doesn't seem to me to be something that, it is something a state could do, couldn't they?
I believe potentially. I was trying to illustrate the fact that from a retail perspective, the concept of reporting to the state the consumer purchases would be a challenge for us.
And I believe North Carolina attempted to collect that type of data about what kind of purchases their residents made in order to follow up with those residents to make sure they were paying their use taxes, and the courts struck that down. And then also in Colorado, they passed some legislation about consumer transactions in the state having access to that data, and that in the courts being challenged.
Do you know the basis? Do you know the basis of that law being struck down in North Carolina by chance?
You know what? I can't remember the decision on that, unfortunately. I can definitely get you that information, though.
Thanks.
No, I can't remember.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions of this panel? Thank you all very much. To the members of the committee, lunch is going to be served at 12:15 in where we had breakfast this morning.